To say that our war is not against Islam, when we ourselves can read the horror that is in the Koran, is tantamount to saying that our war was not against Nazism, when we ourselves could have read the similar horror that is in Adolf Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. In fact, during World War II, because of their shared hatred of both Jews and the British presence in the Middle East, at least two notable Islamic politicians, namely the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and the Prime Minister of Iraq, actively collaborated with the Nazis. But our contemporary Western world leaders are merely seeking to placate the Muslims the same way that British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain once sought to placate the Nazis. And, just like Chamberlain, our leaders are thereby just postponing a cultural clash that is inevitable, and thereby increasing its ferocity when it finally does occur. Our Western world leaders think that their accepting Islam makes them loving and liberal, but actually they are thereby accepting the most hate-filled and ultra-conservative religious movement in all the history of the world. And whether they realize it or not, our leaders are thereby opening their arms to a religion that in one way or another has utterly destroyed every national culture it has ever touched in all the history of the world. Because the first thing that an Islamic regime does, even a mainstream Islamic regime, when it first takes over a country, is to censor that country's books and other media, and to regulate, if not to outlaw, its music, sports, and fashion, thus transforming a possibly vibrant and perhaps even deeply moving culture into something as trite and as insipid as Islamic so-called culture. The refreshingly good books and movies that have come out of Islamic nations in recent years have done so only because they were able to escape or to skirt their culturally trite and insipid Islamic censors. And apart from developing algebra and naming a few stars, which Muslims did primarily at Islamic learning centers in medieval Spain, where, of course, Muslim scholars would have been as much under the influence of European scholastic culture as under the influence of Islamic culture, and where, in fact, Muslim scholars did read Greek classical works, and apart from exploring frankly pedestrian and sometimes downright monotonous symmetrical patterns in graphical art, and perhaps we could also include, apart from writing the 1001 Nights, Islamic countries have historically, relative to their vast populations, contributed extremely little to either world culture or to world knowledge, and have contributed virtually nothing over the last 5 centuries. But of course, our Western world leaders are not the ones whose daily lives are impacted by the pernicious teachings in the Koran, because they live in big mansions protected behind high walls. Rather, it is we, the unprotected little people, who are actually exposed to Islamic practitioners whose lives are impacted by these pernicious Quranic teachings. At this time, I would like to offer a few words of support to our many Quran-suffering friends around the world. We feel for you. Fühlen wir uns für Sie, our friends in Germany, because of the many heinous and unprovoked Islamic attacks in your land, especially the Islamic sexual attacks in Cologne on hundreds of your women in a single night, New Year's Eve 2015, which sexual attacks, although not directly called for by the Quran, are certainly encouraged by the Quran's violently anti-female stance, and which hark back to the days, not so long ago, when many Muslims held harems, and when Islamic Barbary pirates abducted and enslaved Europeans for sexual as well as for other purposes. We feel for you. Nous nous sentons pour vous, our friends in France, the country that stopped the original Muslim invasion of Europe in 732, because of the many heinous and unprovoked Islamic attacks in your land, especially the Islamic attacks on your Charlie Hebdo magazine and on your Bataclan concert hall. And now we must add to this already nauseatingly long yet never-ending list of heinous and unprovoked Islamic attacks on masses of innocent and unarmed people, the recent Islamic attack on the Brussels airport in Belgium, your French-speaking neighbor to the north. We feel for you, Que sentimos por ustedes, our friends in Spain, a land once conquered by the Islamic Moors, and whose beautiful churches those Moors converted into mosques, because of the many heinous and unprovoked Islamic attacks on your land, especially the so-called 11M Islamic attack on your Madrid commuter trains. We feel for you. Mucho time de vos. And please forgive me if I did not say that just right. Our friends in Russia, in spite of whatever differences our countries may have had in the past, because of the many heinous and unprovoked Islamic attacks in your land, especially the Islamic attack on your Dubrovka theater, but more so because of the Islamic attack on the helpless and innocent school children in your primary school in Beslan, which, along with the attacks on school children in Peshawar, Pakistan, and Dolore, Nigeria, where the children were burned alive, is the most heartbreaking Islamic attack of all. Rest assured, all of our friends throughout the entire world, who were saddened or outraged by this pussy Islamic attack on defenseless children, that the true God in heaven, not Allah but the real God, has thrown the wretched souls of the monstrous animals who committed those outrageous acts of child murder into the vengeful fires of hell to burn forever, while the angels of the precious children who were murdered by those satanic child abusers are now forever celebrating in the comfort of God's own bosom. So also we feel for you, our friends the Britons on the targeted double-decker bus in London, and on or in all of the many other Islamic targets in Britain as well. Our friends the Danes at the Crudenton Cultural Center, and also at the traditional graduation bus ride in Copenhagen, where Muslim immigrants attacked random students with rocks and acid. Our friends the Australians at Paddy's Pub in Bali. Our friends the Christians, Zoroastrians, Sufi, and Yazidi throughout the Middle East, especially the Yazidi, whose women and children Islamic terrorists buried alive or carried away as sex slaves. Our friends the Hindus and Sikhs in the Punjab, for although the religious violence in the Punjab started out as mutual, now only the Muslims there remain violent. Our friends the Buddhists in southern Thailand. Our friends the Christians in southern Philippines, Coptic Egypt, and throughout all the rest of Africa, especially the heavily targeted African countries of Sudan, Somalia, Nigeria, Kenya, Libya, Niger, Cameroon, Tunisia, Chad, Mali, the Ivory Coast, and Uganda. And our friends the nonviolent Jews throughout the entire world, because of the heinous and unprovoked Koran-fueled attacks on all of the innocent people in all of your countries or in all of your religions, only because they are not Islamic. And please forgive me if I failed to mention your particular country or your particular religion, for I am simply overwhelmed by the sheer volume of such heinous and unprovoked Islamic attacks. We also feel for you, the people of the good-hearted religions of the world that have not yet been attacked by Muslims, but inevitably will be, such as the Falun Gong. For if the communists persecute you now, you can bet that the Muslims will persecute you even more when they finally get the chance. All of us in all of our separate religions, or their associated countries, plus those of us in no religion at all, have suffered together from the horrific teachings in the Koran, if from nothing else, then from the clear Quranic commands to spread terror among us infidels. And all of us must now unite together to defeat these horrific teachings by denouncing them. Our ignorant world media have been excusing these Quran-fueled murderers as much as our ignorant governments have. Our media have been telling us that we should tolerate Islam, but in so doing they are telling us that we should tolerate the intolerant. Whenever a Muslim is injured or killed in a conflict with Coptic Christians in Egypt, our world media always portray that conflict as a battle in a mutually aggressive religious war, highlighting the intolerance of all religion. But the truth is that such Coptic Muslim conflicts always follow on the heels of a unilateral, bloody massacre of innocent, unarmed, and peace-loving Coptic Christians by Muslims, including many mainstream Muslims, leaving sometimes dozens or even scores dead. Right now, throughout 2016, our media have been reporting on Buddhist attacks on Muslims in Bangkok, Thailand, and once again portraying that conflict as religious intolerance on the part of the Buddhists. But they never did report on the probably hundreds of Buddhists killed by Muslims in recent years in the southern part of that country, where, just as in the southern part of the Philippines, Muslims are trying to form an independent Islamic state. I knew 15 years before Muslim violence became a problem that it was going to become a problem, not only because of the free license given to that violence that I had read about in the Koran, but also because of contemporary acts of increasing Muslim violence that I was reading about in the underground media. For example, a report in Voice of the Martyrs magazine about a Somali Christian pastor whose 2 young sons had their throats slit by Muslims right before this pastor's eyes, only because he would not renounce his Christian faith. A news story that, along with countless other such newsworthy stories of Muslim attacks on other religions, our mainstream world media apparently deemed unworthy of coverage. Although, we must credit our media for finally giving adequate coverage to the recent Islamic murder of the French Catholic priest in Saint-Etienne-du-Rouvray, where some self-professing Muslims, who actually had good hearts, refused even just to bury his Koran-inspired murderers. All of us in all of our non-Islamic religions, or no religion at all, and in all of our non-Islamic countries, need to unite against the menace of the Koran by denouncing it and exclaiming its horror, with or without the support of our lying world media or our own lying governments.